Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
All right, so buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving into some pretty thought-provoking territory.
Yeah, you could say that.
We're going to be looking at this idea of democracy as a religion.
Quite a concept, isn't it?
Yeah, and before anyone gets worried, we're not getting into any political debates here.
Right.
This is more like, well, it's like an intellectual puzzle we found when we were going through a really interesting set of sources.
Interesting might be a bit of an understatement, wouldn't you say?
I think so.
Given where these documents came from.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, we're talking about materials that were taken from Osama bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan.
That's right.
The CIA actually released all these files back in 2017.
Yep.
And there's a ton of stuff in there. Letters, videos, audio files, even personal correspondence, you name it.
A real treasure trove of information.
Yeah, and right in the middle of all this, there's this document with a really attention-grabbing title.
It certainly is.
It's called Democracy, a Religion.
Written by Abu Muhammad Asim al-Maqdisi and translated by Abu Muhammad al-Maliki.
Now, talk about irony, right?
Yeah.
Finding a critique of democracy in a place like that.
It does make you wonder.
So let's actually dive into the document itself for a minute.
Sounds good.
I mean, the title alone, Democracy, a Religion, just jumps out at you.
It certainly does.
What's your initial reaction to that? Does it even make sense when you first hear it?
Well, I think it definitely grabs your attention.
Sure.
But to really dig into it, we need to think about, well, what actually makes something a religion?
Right.
Usually we think about a belief system, rituals, some kind of moral code, a sense of community.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
And often, a concept of something sacred or divine.
So then the question is, does democracy as a system of government actually fit into all of that?
That's the very argument that al-Maqdisi is trying to make.
And he doesn't hold back, does he?
Not at all. He uses some really strong language to get his point across.
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat, he quotes the Quran saying, "And whosoever seeks a way other than submission to Allah, it will not be accepted from him, and he will be a loser in the hereafter."
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's some powerful stuff.
Definitely.
How does he connect that to democracy, though?
Well, he's basically saying that true submission should only be to God.
Right.
And that democracy, with all its emphasis on man-made laws and majority rule, well, it kind of pulls people away from that absolute submission.
He goes even further, too, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
He even calls democratic constitutions void and democratic laws false.
Mm-hmm.
Can you unpack that a little bit for us? What do you think he's really trying to say with those terms?
Well, I think here's where it's really important to understand Islamic thought.
Okay.
Al-Maqdisi is most likely arguing that any law that isn't based on divine revelation, well, it's just flawed, illegitimate.
Interesting.
Like, from his point of view, any attempts humans make to create a fair system without God's guidance, they're ultimately meaningless.
I see. So it all comes back to that core belief.
Exactly.
Then there's this other phrase that really jumped out at me when I was reading this.
Which one's that?
He talks about polytheistic parliamentary councils.
Yes.
What an image, right?
It's certainly striking, isn't it?
What could he possibly mean by that?
Well, that's some pretty strong language, and I think it shows how strongly he feels.
Yeah.
Essentially, what he's doing is drawing a parallel between democratic systems, with all their different voices and decision-making bodies.
Right.
And the idea of polytheism.
Okay.
Which, as you know, is completely opposed to Islam's belief in one God.
So he's basically saying that having all these different voices in democracy is like worshiping many gods.
That's the comparison he's making.
Wow, okay. I'm starting to see how he's building this whole argument.
It's quite a clever, albeit controversial, approach.
It is. It's interesting. The translator mentions that al-Maqdisi doesn't just use the Quran for this.
Right.
He also pulls from the Sunnah, which is the Prophet Muhammad's teachings.
Uh-huh.
And he even uses logical reasoning to try to make his case.
He's really pulling out all the stops.
Yeah. Can you talk a bit about how these sources are viewed within Islamic thought, especially when it comes to things like government and law?
Sure. So first off, you have the Quran, which is considered the literal word of God. So that holds the highest authority.
Makes sense.
Then you have the Sunnah, which provides those practical examples and interpretations of Islamic principles.
Okay.
And then logical reasoning within an Islamic framework, of course, is used to apply those principles to different situations.
So al-Maqdisi is basically grounding his whole critique of democracy in this very deeply rooted Islamic framework.
Exactly. He's not just giving a personal opinion.
Right.
He's trying to show that his views are actually in line with a very specific interpretation of Islamic tradition.
Okay, so he's trying to make it a theological argument, not just a political one.
That's a great way to put it.
Now let's go back to that idea of submission for a minute. Is it really as black and white as he makes it seem? Is it only about submitting to God, or could you argue that being part of a democracy requires a different kind of submission?
That's a really interesting point, and it brings up this crucial potential conflict. The tension between personal beliefs, especially religious ones, and the requirements of a democratic system.
That's a fascinating thought.
It is, isn't it? It is, isn't it? And it's something that Islamic scholars have been wrestling with for centuries.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, some argue that as long as the core beliefs of Islam aren't being violated, participating in a democratic system can be okay. It can be reconciled with faith.
I see. So there's room for interpretation there.
Exactly. But then you have others like al-Maqdisi who see any system that isn't based on divine law as inherently problematic.
So there's a real spectrum of thought within Islam on this.
Absolutely. It's a diverse and complex religion with a wide range of interpretations.
Right, right. It's important to remember that.
It is. Reducing an entire faith to the views expressed in this one document would be a huge oversimplification.
Absolutely. And to be fair, critiques of democracy, even those coming from sources we might not agree with, can sometimes bring up valid points, right?
Oh, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
even within democratic societies, we're constantly grappling with these big questions like the potential for tyranny of the majority,
Yeah.
how to protect minority rights, finding that balance between individual freedom and a common good.
It's a constant balancing act.
It is, and while we should never condone or downplay the dangers of extremist ideologies, engaging with their arguments and the questions they raise, it can actually be intellectually stimulating.
I see what you mean. It's like trying to understand your opponent's strategy in a game of chess.
Exactly. You might not agree with their moves,
Right.
but you need to understand their logic if you want to counter them effectively.
That's a great analogy.
So, going back to the document, I'm really struck by how al-Maqdisi seems to present this idea of democracy as a religion, as this kind of attractive alternative for his audience.
Yeah, it makes you think about how effective that kind of framing could be, especially for people who are already feeling disillusioned with democracy or struggling to reconcile their faith with a secular system.
It's like extremist groups often thrive on those feelings of disillusionment.
Yeah.
They offer this sense of belonging, of purpose, that can be really appealing.
It's a powerful reminder of how influential ideas can be.
Absolutely, especially when they connect with people who are searching for meaning or who feel like they're on the outside of existing systems.
So what can we do about it? How do we counter that kind of thinking?
I think it comes down to critical thinking, media literacy, and engaging in these thoughtful dialogues, even about difficult and uncomfortable topics.
We need to be able to break down those ideas, understand why they appeal to people, and then offer alternative narratives that support democratic values.
And narratives that respect the diversity of viewpoints within any religious or cultural group.
Couldn't agree more. So let's shift gears a bit and look at how al-Maqdisi structures his argument. He seems to lean heavily on this idea of absolute truth. Truth that's revealed through divine law.
Right.
And then he contrasts that with what he sees as the relativism of democratic decision-making.
That's a key part of his argument.
Because for someone like al-Maqdisi, who truly believes in the absolute truth of divine law, all those compromises that are built into a democratic system, they might seem like a form of idolatry, like putting human opinion above God's word.
Exactly, and that clash between absolute truth and the back and forth of democratic deliberation, which often involves compromise and finding consensus, that's really at the heart of his critique.
It's a really interesting philosophical dilemma.
Isn't it?
Even outside of the religious context, like how do we as individuals, as societies, deal with that tension between deeply held beliefs and the need to find common ground in a diverse world?
That's a big question, one that democracies have been wrestling with for ages.
And is there an easy answer?
No, not really. But I think ongoing dialogue, respectful debate, and a genuine willingness to try to understand different perspectives are essential.
I think exploring this idea of democracy as a religion, as strange as it might seem, has actually helped us see some of those fundamental tensions and challenges within democracies.
I agree, it's been illuminating.
By examining these radical critiques, we can get a deeper understanding of both the strengths and the weaknesses of democratic principles.
I'm really glad we did this deep dive.
Me too. It's been incredibly thought-provoking, hasn't it?
It really has, and I'm sure our listeners are feeling the same way.
Yeah, hopefully it sparks some new questions and insights for them too.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of our listeners,
Yeah,
I think it's important to talk about how we, as engaged citizens and critical thinkers, should approach this kind of information, especially when it comes from sources that challenge our assumptions or make us uncomfortable.
that's a really important point. So what do we do? How should we handle this?
I think we need to approach this kind of information with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Okay. Consider the source, think about any potential biases,
Right.
and try to find a wider range of perspectives before jumping to any conclusions.
So, if we come across something like this document, it's not about just dismissing it outright.
No, not at all.
It's about looking at it critically, doing some more research, and understanding the bigger context.
Exactly. And remembering that the actions of extremist groups don't reflect the beliefs of the larger communities they claim to represent.
Right. It's important to avoid making those generalizations.
It is. Extremism is a complex issue with a lot of different factors at play.
This idea of extremism being influenced by various factors is really interesting. I'd love to explore that more sometime.
We could definitely do that.
But for now, let's focus on wrapping up this particular deep dive.
Sounds good.
Any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners before we go? Given that democracy often relies on majority rule, I think it's worth pondering whether this inherently clashes with the concept of absolute truth found in many religions. Is this a point of friction worth exploring further? And if democracy is not a religion, is there something about it that inspires such strong devotion in some? Why?
Those are some really great questions to think about. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder them on your own. We've been exploring this idea of democracy as a religion.
It has been quite the journey.
Yeah, a concept put forth by Abu Muhammad Asim al-Maqdisi in a document found in those materials recovered from Osama bin Laden's compound.
Unpacking al-Maqdisi's arguments, considering the context.
And even thinking about those broader implications.
I think one of the big takeaways here is, well, it's the importance of approaching information, especially the kind that challenges what we think we know, with a critical and discerning mind.
Yeah, it's not about just accepting or rejecting everything we come across.
No, definitely not.
It's more about, doing some thoughtful analysis, getting different perspectives.
And being open to questioning our own assumptions.
That's so crucial these days with all the information coming at us from every direction.
It really is.
It's about nurturing that intellectual curiosity, wanting to understand the why behind the what.
And recognizing that even those really out there ideas can sometimes give us valuable insights.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
I think it's worth highlighting a few key points for everyone listening.
Sounds good. What are you thinking?
First off, remember that what al-Maqdisi says in this document, it doesn't represent all of Islamic thought.
It's so important to remember that.
Avoid making sweeping generalizations about any religious or cultural group.
Based on just the actions or beliefs of a few.
Exactly. It's just not accurate or fair.
And secondly, I think it's worth thinking about the power of ideas.
How they can bring people together or tear them apart.
Inspire or manipulate.
It's a good reminder to be careful about what we consume, how we evaluate the messages we're getting, and always try to understand the nuances of complex issues.
I think that's key.
And finally, I think this deep dive has shown us how important it is to engage in respectful dialogue.
Even with people who we might strongly disagree with.
It's through those open and honest conversations that we can start to bridge those divides
Challenge extremist ideologies.
and hopefully build a more just and equitable world for everyone.
Noel said.
Well, that brings us to the end of our exploration of this really fascinating and sometimes challenging topic.
It's certainly been an enlightening experience.
I hope everyone listening enjoyed this deep dive as much as we did.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds engaged.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of While We Were Distracted. We will continue our dive into documents and books found in the bin Laden compound that have been released by CIA. To see the full dump, check the description and comments or visit the CIA library at cia.gov. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.